Great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Jerome Foundation's Jerome Hill Artists Fellowship webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And your audio line is muted, but as we go through, feel free to ask questions. Click the chat button in your menu bar. You can also click the live transcript option to have closed captioning. This is done by a computer, so you may experience some strange transcription translations, but a corrected closed caption will be there for the recording of this session. And that's going to be posted to our website on the events page in the coming days. So feel free to type your questions as we go through. We'll probably save them for the end and maybe answer them along the way as we make our way through the presentation.
Apologies for the barking dog. Of course, the mail carrier has to come right now. So we are joining you today from Minnesota Makoche, also called Minnesota. This is the unceded land of the Dakota peoples and the current home to 11 tribes, including Dakota and Anishinaabe. We honor and respect the tribal sovereignty, rights, and cultural resilience of the many Native and Indigenous peoples connected to this land, as well as the lands of the Lenape, Munsee, Canarsie, and many other tribes in what is called New York City. I'm Eleanor Savage. I'm the program director at Jerome Foundation. I'm pronoun flexible. For those who can't see me, I'm white-skinned, 58-year-old with short cropped hair. I'm wearing a blue shirt, black sweater, and gray suit coat. Behind me is bookshelves with many curiosities and some books, a window, and a yellow wall. And I will ask my colleagues to introduce Melissa.
Thanks, Eleanor. So happy to be here with you all today. I am Melissa Levin, and I am a new program associate with the Jerome Foundation, and I am based in Brooklyn and New York City. My pronouns are she, her, and for a visual description, I am a white-skinned woman of Jewish Eastern European descent. I have curly brown hair with bangs, and I'm wearing a bright orangey yellow sweatshirt. Behind me is a bookshelf with many books and other objects, and a lightish pink wall with some framed objects and postcards. And I will now pass on to Laura.
Thanks, Melissa. Hello, my name is Laura Mimosa Montez, program pronouns she, her. I am also a new program associate based in Minnesota. For a visual description, I am a light-skinned Puerto Rican woman wearing a red sweater with short cropped curly hair, seated in my home office on a gray couch, white walls, and some text-based artworks behind me. I think I'll pass it over to Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andrea Brown. I'm the Grants and Program Administrator at Jerome. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white-skinned woman with short, dark hair, black glasses. I'm wearing a blue sweater. I'm in my 40s, and I've got some bookshelves with many books and other things behind me.
Thanks, everyone. And not here today with us is the rest of the Jerome staff, Ben Cameron, our president, and our finance team, Coretta Kendricks and Lori Lewan. So we have about an hour together here this morning, and you'll see the agenda on screen here. We want to leave ample time for your questions, but we do have a lot of ground to cover. So we will do this as quickly as we can, but also we want to make sure to give you the details you need to be informed about the fellowship program. We will share a little bit about the Jerome Foundation, and then we'll go into details around eligibility, the steps to apply, the timeline and key dates. And this information is included in the fellowship overview, which Andrea will post the link for in the chat box in case you want to follow along. There are some things that we won't go into in as much depth as is in the overview. So that's a good tool for you to use as you're working on this application. We will also have another information session on February 24th, which will go into detail on the application. So we're going to be very general in our application information today. I'm going to turn this over now to Melissa to share with you more about Jerome Foundation.
Thanks, Eleanor. So the Jerome Foundation was established in 1964 and has been supporting artists and arts organizations for 58 years. It was founded by Jerome Hill, who was an Academy Award-winning filmmaker, a composer, a painter, and a philanthropist. And the foundation awards grants in both Minnesota, which is Jerome Hill's home state, and also in New York City, where he spent much of his creative life. Our mission is to promote a dynamic culture through direct support to early career artists in both Minnesota and in the 5 boroughs of New York City, and also to the nonprofit organizations that offer programs, services, and other activities for those artists. And I'll hand off to Laura to talk about our values.
Thanks, Melissa. The values that guide our grant making are diversity, innovation, and risk, and humility. Diversity is considered in the broadest sense. The foundation supports a diverse range of artists and organizations, including but not limited to those of diverse cultures, races, sexual identities, genders, generations, aesthetics, points of view, languages, physical abilities, and missions. We support a diverse range of artistic disciplines and forms created in a variety of contexts and for different audiences, and a diverse range of early career artists. We also value innovation and risk-taking, which reflect the foundation's interest in supporting artists from diverse backgrounds and experiences who are expanding ways of working, asking questions, and inspiring new ways of imagining. The foundation applauds unconventional approaches to solving problems and supports artists that challenge and engage the traditional aesthetic and/or social dimensions of their respective disciplines. We also value humility, the foundation's aspiration to support artists who embrace their roles as part of a larger community of artists and citizens, and who consciously work with a sense of purpose, whether aesthetic, social, or both. The foundation works for artists rather than the reverse, and believe that artists are the best authorities to define their needs and challenges, an essential humility reflective of Jerome Hill, our founder. I would encourage those of you attending to look at the past grantees section of our website to get a sense of who has been funded by this grant program, fellowship program, and their artistic pursuits for ideas about how our values are reflected by the artists we support. I'll hand it over to Eleanor now to take us into the details of the fellowship program.
I'm unmuting. Thank you, Laura. The Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship Program is still somewhat new in terms of the history of the foundation. Our first round of fellows for this program were announced in 2019. And in the first round, we received 1,167 applications and awarded 60 fellowships, and 2 of the fellowships went to co-applicant teams. In the second round of the program in 2021, there were 820 applications, and again, 60 fellowships with 2 going to co-applicant teams. I want to clarify something that might be confusing. So as Melissa mentioned, the Jerome Foundation supports early career artists, but we also support arts organizations that provide programs for early career artists in Minnesota and New York City. And some of these programs have been long running and have the name Jerome Fellowship Program or Jerome Artist Residency Program. For example, the Queens Museum in New York and the Playwright Center in Minneapolis both have a Jerome Fellowship Program. So those programs are completely run by the arts organizations. We just fund them. This program, the Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship Program, is run by the staff that you see here on screen today. And we understand that there can be some confusion around the various namings of these things. I'm going to go now into some of the fellowship basics. So, as Laura mentioned, we support a diverse range of early career generative artists based in Minnesota or the 5 boroughs of New York City. And we'll go into much further detail about eligibility. The fellowship is a grant of $25,000 per year for 2 consecutive years, a total of $50,000. This is flexible funding. Artists can decide for themselves their 2-year plan and how to allocate the funds. And we'll go into more detail about how you can use the funds later in the presentation this morning. Generally speaking, fellowship funds may be used for the creation and presentation of new work, artist development, and or professional artistic career development. These funds support grantees to take creative risks, explore new ideas, and investigate professional and artistic activities. And we expect to award a total of 63 fellowships across 8 fields. And we have 2 new fields identified for this round of the program. So you'll see those listed here on the screen. What we want you to know is that within each field, the foundation supports a wide range of aesthetics, forms, creative practices, lineages, and points of view. And we applaud experimentation and interdisciplinarity within each field. The fellowship overview includes a description, very detailed description of each of these artistic fields. And we ask you to think about which panel is best positioned to review your work. And you may only submit 1 application. So you want to give that some thought. And we will pass now to Melissa to take us into that eligibility information.
Thanks, Eleanor. So as Eleanor said, we are going to spend a good amount of time on defining here who is eligible to apply for the fellowship. And this is really because the last thing we want is for an artist to spend time on an application that can't be considered because that artist is ineligible. So we'll start with eligible artists are residents of either Minnesota or the 5 boroughs of New York City, and those who have been residents for at least 1 year at the time of application. Eligible artists are generative artists who are currently creating new original work. For the purposes of this fellowship, we define generative artists as those who conceive and create new original work, such as choreographers, composers, playwrights and devisers, filmmakers, poets, writers of fiction or creative nonfiction, visual artists, and many more. Jerome Foundation does not fund artists who have solely performed or developed or produced the work of others, such as dancers, musicians, actors, editors, designers, journalists, and others who are not also generative artists. And there is a field-specific list of these roles on page 13 of the fellowship overview, and definitely encourage you to look there for more detail. And then just a note to define new original work a little more specifically. New original work is that which has been created and developed by the artist from concept to completion and is not a remount, a revival, or an interpretation of previously existing material. Next, eligible artists are early career artists. And for the purposes of the Jerome Foundation and for this fellowship, that is artists with at least 2 years, but not more than 10 years of a professional generative artistic practice. And we really want to note that this also excludes any time off for any reason, including but not limited to time spent in a degree granting program, if applicable. So this means that individuals who are at the very beginning of their careers and who, for example, do not have the required completed and presented works are not eligible to apply. And likewise, artists who have a practice extending beyond 10 years and or those who have received significant recognition for their body of work are not eligible. Next, generative artists. So in even more specifically, eligible artists are generative artists who have 2 or more completed and presented works. And again, this is works created and presented outside of a degree granting program, if that's applicable to you. These works must have been produced or presented, published, exhibited, or screened by an independent organization or producer that is not self-presented. And I will pass this to Laura to talk a little bit more about eligibility.
Thank you. Okay, so some things eligible artists are not they're not enrolled as a full-time student in a degree granting education program at the time of application during the fellowship period. Eligible artists are not tenured faculty members or the equivalent. Eligible artists are not an applicant named on more than one application. Eligible artists are not a previously awarded recipient of a Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship. Artists who have received significant awards and prizes for multiple project works in any field may also be considered too established or recognized to be considered early career and qualify for support in this fellowship. The fellowship overview has field-specific lists of awards that may put you beyond early career considerations, so we encourage you to review that list within the fellowship overview guidelines. I will pass it back to Melissa.
Great, so a few more notes about eligibility. Very important to note that age and formal training in a degree granting program are not factors in determining eligibility for this fellowship. Also note that artists may only submit one application. That means you can't submit multiple applications in any one field or applications in multiple fields. Also, this application must be submitted by the artists themselves and not by an organization or another entity, whether that's a nonprofit, a producer, an agent, a multi-owner LLC, or a management company, among others, on the applicant's behalf. And fellowships are awarded to artists, not to organizations. These funds are issued directly, again, only to the applicants as named in the application or to their single member LLCs, if that's applicable. Additionally, payments cannot be made to fiscal sponsors, management companies, or producers, multi-owned LLCs, S-corps, consultants, or 501c3 organizations. Back to Laura.
Chiming back in to speak to collaborator eligibility. Ongoing collaborators may submit a single application requesting support for 2 to 5 artists who will share the fellowship funds equally. Artists applying collaboratively must first meet all of the individual fellowship eligibility requirements, must also have a demonstrated history of creating new work, and an ongoing commitment to working together throughout the fellowship period. Again, these funds are split equally between each member who is part of the collaborative application. And because you can apply only once if you're named in a collaborative application, you cannot apply as an individual for this same fellowship. With that, I'll invite Eleanor back to tell us more about fields.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when you begin your application process, we ask you to select the field in which you would like to be reviewed, considering which panel is best positioned to understand your current artistic practice, your generative work, and the work that you plan to pursue during your fellowship. Information is available in the fellowship overview and the application guide. And you can find these links on the Jerome website or on the landing page and Submittable. And I'm gonna hand it back to Laura to talk about that eligibility quiz.
Great. So when you go into Submittable, you find a landing page with information about the fellowship. It'll look like the image on the bottom left here. Below that, you'll find links to the 8 fields as seen in that middle screenshot. Once you select the field in which you want to apply, you'll see the eligibility quiz for the field in which you are applying. The quiz aligns with the eligibility criteria we just reviewed. We start with the quiz to prevent artists who are not eligible from spending valuable time on the application. If you are ineligible, you will not be able to proceed into the application. But if your situation requires more discussion, you'll be prompted at the completion of the quiz to set up an eligibility phone call with Jerome program staff. And I'll invite Andrea to speak more about these phone calls.
Yeah, so the following artists must schedule an eligibility call with Jerome program staff. That's prior to applying and before April 15th of 2022. So those people required to have this phone call are those applying as a collaborative of 3, 4, or 5 artists. Those who are in a PhD program and have completed all but their dissertation, who are also actively creating new work as a generative artist and meet all the other eligibility criteria. And a note on, generative artists who have more than 10 years, excluding but not limited to time spent off in an educational degree program, caretaking, taking a different paid job for amount of time. So if you have more than 10 years or less than 2 years of experience, you're typically going to be ineligible. But if that's the case for you, you may wish to discuss your personal circumstances, based on specific creative practice considerations. So if the scale of the work, or if it takes extended creative cycles to complete your work that puts you beyond those time realms, you will want to make an eligibility call appointment. But I want to remind you that no other factors can be considered for artists who have exceeded that total 10 years of generative work, and that need and or a lack of public recognition are not factors for this consideration. We also want to invite anyone who has other questions about eligibility to make that phone appointment and kind of talk it through with staff before you get into doing your application. So you'll make this appointment by going to the link that's on the screen. It's also in the fellowship overview and on our website. So you can make these appointments through April 15th to review CVs, and our program staff will help you with your questions about eligibility and review the process for those collaborative applications involving 3, 4, or 5 artists. So to make this application, you'll go to the link where you'll sign up for that 15-minute appointment, and anyone requesting an eligibility appointment will be prompted to upload a draft CV as part of making an appointment. And this is required to do before you have your phone call with staff. I'll hand it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Andrea. So as Eleanor said, we'll be really broadly going over the application and steps to apply today, but later in the month, we will have a specific application info session. So after you have read the fellowship overview and determined what field you will apply in, as Laura said, you will go to Submittable and take an eligibility quiz. If you pass that quiz, you will then go into the application. And a note that if you do prefer to read the application questions before you go into Submittable, you can download the application guide as a PDF from our website. You can also read the additional information in the fellowship overview, which talks about costs supported by the fellowship and the process and requirements for those who are selected as fellows. And again, you can also attend our future information sessions, which in addition to an application info session include a CV workshop, a work sample workshop, and Q&A sessions. And we'll go over those dates and details at the end. Back to Eleanor.
Okay, so what is in this application, you might wonder. I can tell you what's not there. We don't ask you for letters of recommendation. We don't ask you for a project description. What we do ask you for is for some basic information. The details, name, pronoun preferences, how you describe your artistic practice. We want to hear from you in your own words, how you describe what you do. We have 3 core questions, and these questions are designed to help panelists get to know an artist, evaluate their work and who their creative communities might be. It invites you to share who you are and what you're working on and where you're directing your creative energies. And the answers may be provided in writing or via video. We do have recommended maximum word and time lengths for each of the questions, and we strongly urge you not to exceed, but there's no like cutoff counter or anything. It's just a recommended length. We'll ask you for work samples from 2 different completed works, and specific instructions are provided in the application guide and in the application, accompanied by additional contextual information. You can offer a 3rd work in progress sample if you have a current work that you're still in progress with as of the application deadline. All of the details regarding formats, time, page counts, and other requirements are available in the application guide and in the application. And then we also ask you for a detailed CV. And again, specific instructions are in these guides and the application. The CV must clearly establish your eligibility for the program by documenting your professional artistic experiences, achievements, and credentials for easy reference by the panelists. The CV should include a clear listing of your generative work with key dates, venues that have supported the work, and your role in the work. It's critical that you include any dates that you were enrolled in degree granting programs, if applicable. And these are the only elements of the application. I will hand it to Melissa now to kind of walk through the review process.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so this is what happens after you submit your application, illustrated in this slide. The Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship applications are reviewed by diverse panels comprised of arts professionals and artists with experience and understanding of both Minnesota and New York City early career artists. Panelists will have wide-ranging knowledge that encompasses a depth and breadth of aesthetics, methodologies, practices, and ways of working and presenting work in various genres, forms, and styles. The review process includes the following steps. As discussed, we'll confirm eligibility first. Once applications are submitted, the Jerome Foundation staff will screen applications for eligibility, and any applicant whose CV does not clearly establish eligibility, as we've just discussed, or applicants who submit an incomplete application or ineligible work samples will not be considered further. The next step is a panel review. And this is the stage at which the foundation assembles separate, diverse, and field-specific panels. All eligible applications are assigned to panelists for review according to the review criteria, which we are about to discuss. Next is finalist review and fellows recommendations. So panelists will assess the applications and determine a group of finalists for further discussion, again, always using the same review criteria, which we'll talk about next. And finally, the Jerome Board of Directors approval. Panelists will recommend a cohort of fellows and alternates to the Jerome Foundation Board of Directors, and they will authorize or decline the panel's recommendations and ultimately award the fellowships. If the directors do determine that a recommended fellow is ineligible, a panel identified alternate will be moved forward as a fellow. And back to Eleanor.
Thanks, Melissa. So what we intend with our review criteria is that you have the same information that the panelists have. So there's no mystery, there's no hidden agendas. It's very explicit for you as an applicant and for the panel. And the criteria are artistic merit of the artist's work, creative explorations and aspirations of the artist and their work, and engagement and or impact of the artist on their fields and or creative communities. The panels assess these criteria based on the information that is in the application. So we will be looking at your work samples, your responses to those core questions, and your history and evidence of support and recognition through your CV. And the panel will consider the alignment among these application elements. For example, do the work samples and the CV reflect the information shared in the core questions, and vice versa? And in reaching the final roster of fellows and alternates, we ask the panels to think not only about the ability of every finalist to meet the criterion strongly, but to recommend a cohort of fellows that collectively captures the energy and diversity of the arts fields. I'm going to give it now to Laura to take us into a deeper dive into the criteria.
Thanks, Eleanor. I also just wanted to acknowledge the questions in the chat, which we'll turn to at the Q&A portion after the presentation. So thank you. Artistic merit is evaluated in terms of achievement as well as potential. It's the highest priority criterion. So needless to say, when you submit an application, if you're eligible, you want to submit your strongest work. Inspired by the Foundation's core value of innovation and risk, this fellowship supports artists engaged in creative risk-taking whose work is expanding, questioning, experimenting with, or reimagining conventional artistic forms. We define artistic merit as indicated by the bulleted points listed on this slide in order to reduce ambiguity for panelists reviewing applications about our Foundation's understanding of the term. To assess the criteria of artistic merit, the panel will review the work samples and the response to core question 1, which is, what are you trying to accomplish as an artist and what is your artistic lineage? I'll invite Melissa back to tell us more about the other criteria.
Thanks, Laura. The second review criteria is creative explorations and aspirations. And for this criteria, artists are asked to clearly identify their current strengths and the areas where they wish to devote more time, and also to share the important questions that they hope to explore through or about their work during a fellowship period. For this criterion, panels will want to understand what makes this an especially opportune time for a 2-year fellowship for you. Panelists will also be asked to honor the creative decisions and aspirations as the artist has defined them, considering whether the artist is sufficiently clear about where they are and whether their aspirations and intentions will help them develop their work, their skills, or their careers. The panel will not be asked to make relative judgments about which creative explorations or aspirations are better than others. Artists may be in a space of not pursuing a particular direction and still figuring out longer-term goals, or may have a specific idea they want to pursue. They have clear goals and a clear plan of how to get there, or they might be somewhere in between these places of exploration. There truly is no right or wrong answer here. And panelists will consider your responses to core question 2 regarding strengths, areas for exploration, and questioning as listed in this slide. And just want to reiterate that this is a detailed question and we encourage you to respond to all aspects of it. Back to Laura here.
The last criteria we'll look at is engagement and or impact. Inspired by the Foundation's value around humility, this fellowship supports artists who embrace their roles as part of a larger community of artists and citizens and consciously works with a sense of purpose, aesthetic, social, or both. An applicant's response to this question helps the panel understand how they, as an artist and their work, embodies this value. To assess the criterion of engagement and/or impact, the panel will review the CV and response to core question 3 regarding your connections to communities, participants, and audiences, and potential contributions to your field. I'll swing it back to Eleanor to speak more about the fellowship funds.
Yeah, so moving out of that, what the application is, to thinking about what can you do with these funds. We will ask people who receive a fellowship to put together a plan and a budget. And you can define your use of funds within, within these 3 categories. So we want to support time and expenses for the creation of new work, artistic development, and/or professional artistic career development. So the creation and presentation of new work is about your time and any expenses incurred in conceiving, creating, or presenting new work. We encourage you to use the funds to support your time in making the work. Artistic development funds are activities that are not tied to a specific work or a project, but are designed to support time and expenses for skill development, research, or investigation into new areas or practices that may or may not find their way into the expression of the new work. And then professional development funds, this is about supporting time and expenses to refine non-artistic skills like marketing, administration, finances, archiving, documentation, social media, building a website, or hiring people to support you in these areas that will help serve your long-term career goals. Again, we will be flexible and expansive in approving the costs that are tied to these kind of 3, we call them buckets. Melissa, I'm going to ask you to share a little more about if you get the fellowship.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yes, if you get the fellowship, a few requirements and also resources. So fellows must attend either an in-person or a virtual orientation meeting. Of course, this will depend on COVID considerations. And these will be held in both Minnesota and New York City in February 2023. At this orientation, you will gain an understanding of the fellowship requirements and possibilities. So we do encourage you to save these dates. And note that funding cannot be used for costs incurred before May 2023, and that fellows can schedule payments in calendar years 2023, 24, and 25, which can be discussed with Jerome Foundation staff at the time of orientation or award. And some additional benefits are that fellows have access to financial planning workshops, professional development, and coaching. While we don't have time to cover the entire fellowship process and requirements, which review what fellows do after they're awarded the grant, we encourage you to review the fellowship overview PDF, which will provide many more details.
And I'm going to cover some highlights from the application and review timeline. So the applications are open now. And in addition to this webinar, we'll also have other information sessions, Q&A sessions, and of course, those eligibility phone calls and other support phone calls between now and April. The applications close on Wednesday, May 4th at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. And again, we cannot accept late applications. Then from May to August, applications will be reviewed to confirm eligibility, and then the panelists will determine the finalists, with panelists meeting and making their recommendation to the Jerome Board between September and November. So all applicants will be notified whether or not they are finalists no later than November 30th of 2022. Next, Jerome's board will approve the fellows, and all finalists will be notified of their application status no later than January 31st of 2023. And as promised, Melissa's going to share more about those future information sessions.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, as I said before, we have additional information sessions coming up. We have a CV specific session and a work sample session, and then some live Q&A sessions. So for information on how to attend these sessions, please go to our website, jeromefdn.org/events. This is also where you can find sessions that are recorded, which will be captioned and posted to the events page after they take place.
Okay, so Wednesday, May 4th, 2022, eyes on the prize. So, you know, we always say this, please get your applications in early if you can. We don't accept late applications or incomplete applications. And once your application is submitted, we are not able to open these for editing or updating. In order to troubleshoot any potential issues that may come up, please try to submit your application in advance of the deadline. Otherwise, you may run out of time. There is a save draft button, so you can work on your application and save and come back later in advance of the deadline, of course. And if you're having any technical issues, contact Submittable using the link at the bottom of the page in the application, or you can contact Andrea Brown, who is our technical wizard. Over to you, Andrea.
Yeah, so before we get into the Q&As, and just a reminder to drop into the chat any questions that you've had come up for you as we've gone through this information. I also want to let you know how you can reach us outside of sessions like these. So if you have questions about your eligibility, of course, you'll want to make that eligibility phone call appointment. If you have general questions about the program, you can make a general phone call appointment with program staff, and you can also send your questions by email. So our email addresses and all of these links are listed in the fellowship overview, and those links to those phone call appointments are on our website as well. And you can contact me by phone or email at any time if you're having technical questions with Submittable. And so it does look like we've got some questions going in to the chat. So just a reminder here, if you do have a question, click that chat button and send them our way, and we'll get started fielding your questions. So to begin with, if Jerome staff has concerns about eligibility, do you alert the artist? Presumably this is after they've submitted an application.
Yeah, we focus our work on eligibility at the front end of the application. So we have eligibility calls available. You can email us with any questions. We really want to make sure that you're eligible before you apply, because it is a considerable amount of work to do the application. So if you, if there's something technical, like if a link doesn't work or something like that, we will contact artists. We're not the kind of foundation that just, declines you based on a technicality. But the eligibility determination should be done before applying.
Another question about eligibility. If you were in a graduate program, when work is being shown or presented or supported, how does that affect your application?
I can take that if no one else wants to jump in. So for eligibility, separate from work samples, for eligibility, you need to have at least 2 works that have been completed and publicly performed or published, screened, exhibited. And these need to be, clear on your resume that you have these public works. Both of these, at least 2 works, need to have been done outside of your time in a degree granting program. For work samples, we allow much more flexibility around those because we want you to present your strongest work, what you're most passionate about, what you feel best conveys who you are as an artist and your work. And that may not be the same as the publicly presented works. It may be, it may not be, but we want to give you some flexibility. We asked for 2 work samples, and one of those can be work that you created and presented while in a degree program. Of course, the panelists have told us over the years that they prefer seeing work that is outside of your degree experience. But we wanted to allow that as an option because we realize that there are, times where the resources that you have access to in a degree program may factor into the quality of the work sample. Does that answer? Anyone else want to?
Yeah, well, we've got a couple other kind of related questions to, what do we mean by these 2 completed works? So I'll go ahead and ask those. So specific to literature, for the 2 required different completed works, must they be books or can they be articles, essays, short stories, etc.? And then related to that, can completed works also include short plays or short films, those kinds of formats?
Yes, the publicly presented published work for literature doesn't have to be books. We realize that many people won't have books. So it can be short stories, it can be creative nonfiction essays, it can be poetry. When you say articles, sometimes articles are like interviews about work or journalistic endeavors, and those would not be eligible. What we're looking for is your creative work. And Andrea, now I've forgotten the rest of the question.
Yeah, so things like short plays, short films.
Yes.
Are those also considered for eligibility purposes?
Yeah, long and short are in all fields are options.
A question here about residency and regarding that applicants must have filed their 2021 federal taxes in New York City or Minnesota. Does that mean that you must have filed taxes for your 2021 income taxes like by the time that you apply, or is it more about like intent, I guess?
Yeah, it's more about intent because people have different filing timelines. We understand that. So it's more about what is your plan? Do you plan to?
Then jumping over to criteria, if we can spend a moment on artistic merit, wondering what do you mean by challenging conventional artistic forms? And if you could describe what you mean by artistic lineage.
Yeah, Melissa or Laura, do you want to jump in on any of these? I'll just say that what Jerome Foundation, our founder, was an artist who valued experimentation in his own work and supported experimentation in other artists' work. And so that's our lineage as a foundation. And so we're really interested in how people within different fields are kind of working with and pushing against and playing with the expression of different kinds of work. So just kind of adhering to, a traditional expression is not going to be as competitive or won't be competitive as people who are really kind of engaging with the form and trying to move it in some way or another. It doesn't, and that doesn't necessarily mean new. I know that that some artists are working with, a good example I can think of is working with language. We have Native American artists that we have supported that are trying to revive their traditional languages as a way of expressing their contemporary work. Anyone else want to add in to that?
I can chime in and just add to this question of artistic lineage. Lineage is a way to get an applicant to maybe speak about artists, writers, other practitioners in the field that you're identifying with, who you may, see your work in conversation with, or see your practice as being influenced or inspired by. So, maybe thinking of, it might be peers or it might be those who precede you, in terms of how you kind of think about, again, your practice within a larger context.
I think we've got a couple questions sort of related to the math of the 2 to 10 years. So maybe we can spend some time walking through a couple of situations here. So someone says, as I understand it, time spent in a degree program after having some public performances, as well as continuing time spent caretaking, does not count toward the 10-year eligibility requirement. Maybe we can kind of walk through what that 10 years is and sort of what is included to make up that 10 years, where you might subtract from that 10 years, et cetera.
Yeah, we're focused on, that kind of early career time in an artist's life. And we realize that not every artist's career trajectory is contiguous. So, in that 2 to 10 year frame, if you take off time to go to do an MFA or a PhD, or if you take off time because you're having children or caretaking a family member, those kind of things where you take time out and basically stop working, don't count against the clock. So that 2 to 10 year time frame may expand over a longer time period.
Eleanor, I wanted to chime in with a kind of different way to ask this question is, for eligibility purposes, generally, what's the earliest an artist might have been making work? If like 2021 is the kind of cutoff there, 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, artists are ineligible if they've been making work before what year, not including the circumstances that we've talked about.
Right. So 2011 is, from 2011 to 2022 is that kind of 10-year frame that we're looking at. And as I said before, there may be some accordion, like an accordion effect going on there, but that's generally the frame.
And sort of related to this, at what date is that 2 to 10 year kind of cutoff considered? Is it the application due date, the award date, when the fellowship starts? Getting more specific into that time frame.
At the application date.
I think we've got some questions around work samples, bodies of work, things like that. So a question for a literature application, should the 20 pages total be double spaced or single spaced? Any rules for page margins? And I would say that for each field, in the application itself, there's going to be really specific information around formats and pages. I know, for literature, you say 11-point font, things like that. Don't do scanned copies. So that level of detail, for visual arts, like what image formats we accept, all of that information is going to be in the application. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything.
I'll just to specifically answer the question, for prose in literature, we do request double spaced 11-point type, and for poetry, there are different specifications. We don't expect you to reformat your poetry into double spaced. You can lay it out how you see your work on the page.
And in terms of for visual art and what we mean by bodies of work, can this be 10 separate pieces from 2 distinct bodies of work? And can we submit several works in progress for our additional work in progress images?
Yes. The preferences for work from at least 2 different, if you're doing like exhibitions, from 2 different exhibitions, 10 images. And then for the work in progress samples, I believe you can do 5 images, and those can be from different bodies of work.
Can you speak to whether or not self-published literary works count towards your eligibility status?
For eligibility, you need to have work that is published by someone other than you, at least 2. So you do need to have 2 not self-published works.
Maybe I'll just chime in because I see a related question. Because of COVID, can work be presented in an online gallery, or just, let's say, online more broadly, be considered for your CV? And the answer to that is yes, if it's through an invitation or curatorial process. Of course, that will be considered towards your eligibility as well.
Yeah, it needs to be an online platform that has some kind of invitation from an outside organization versus just uploading to your website or blog or something like that.
And again, kind of around literary writing, we might need more clarification on this, but what about scripts that have been presented formally? An essay written and appears in the Washington Post? Or for a writer, how do webinars and podcasts fit into the criteria?
In terms of scripts, I mean, that to me, I'm not sure what field you're working in, but playwrights can present scripts. That's an eligible work sample for that field. Essays, as long as it's a creative essay versus a journalistic essay that appears in the Post, that would be eligible.
Podcasts that may have been authored?
Again, we need to, it has to be your creative work. So I did an eligibility call with a playwright who recorded, one of his plays in a podcast form for access and presentation. So if it's your creative work, yes. If it's journalistic or interviews, no.
And when it comes to making work and defining that, is for the eligibility 2 to 10 years, wondering, what if you were practicing your art, but you didn't publicly present? Are those years counted in that 2 to 10 range? Or does the clock kind of start once you've publicly presented your work?
Yeah, we've been starting the clock at, with publicly presented, or if you got funded by a grant or some kind of acknowledgement of or engagement around your work. So it could be self published or presented. It could be engagement in a fellowship or a residency program, but some kind of activity around you getting your work out. That makes sense.
Another question, do we need to remove our names from work samples submitted from the title of the submission or the text itself, or is that not necessary?
No, please don't do that. No, I think that is done when there is a quote unquote blind review, and that is not what we do.
How do you evaluate a CV? In other words, do you weigh different kinds of work in different ways, i.e. an artist talk versus a performance?
That's a little tricky to answer categorically. I think we don't, in general, judge, but we are looking for your creative work, especially for the eligibility requirements. And an artist talk is good context around your work, but I think the panel is more interested in knowing about your actual creative work.
This is specific to music. Can an independent group submit? They are not attached to a record label or a distributor.
Yes. There's no requirement that anyone has an agent, a publisher, those kind of requirements aren't part of this eligibility.
Maybe I would add to that around, it might be helpful to look at collaborator eligibility if you are wanting to apply as a group, to make sure that you are fitting the, between 2 to 5, a group of between 2 to 5 artists, and that all named applicants also meet all of the eligibility requirements, and that if you have questions or are applying as a group of between 3 and 5, that you make time to schedule a call with one of us to talk specifically about your group.
And I just want to point out, I know that we're a few minutes over, but I think we are going to stay on the line so that we can make it through the questions in the chat, if that's okay. So for a fiction writer, is an online only magazine, would that count as a publication credit?
Yes, as long as there is some kind of selection process involved in having your work presented on that platform.
And how does curation work fit into the application? So presumably this is a generative artist who also does some curatorial work.
This fellowship is focused on your work as a generative artist. Again, like your work as a curator will be kind of context for your overall career, but it's not the focus of this fellowship. So it wouldn't count in terms of the eligibility requirements or the work sample requirements.
Another question about work samples and meeting the CV requirements around during one's matriculation or tenure in a degree program, but work created not specifically to meet the assigned requirements for that program. how do those factor into eligibility, either counting towards the 2 in the CV or as being eligible to show as work samples?
So if it's work that whether or not it was an assignment or whether it was created while you're in a degree program, that doesn't count towards your eligibility requirement. You are allowed for the work samples, to submit one of the work samples that was created while you're in a degree program.
This is kind of related. Should our CVs include generative work made during a degree granting program? And similarly, should we include on our CVs non-generative work or work in which we supported other artists or groups but did not have creative control?
Yes, include all of your generative work on your CV. And in terms of non-generative work, it's really good to have that information on your CV, but what is important is to not do a comprehensive list of like, okay, here's all of my film work, and in lump generative work, work in which you were the cinematographer or an editor, or work over which you don't have creative control, because then the panel has a really hard time understanding, like, what is this artist's true generative path? So you want to make sure that you kind of clearly label and separate any non-generative work from your generative work.
I wanted to chime in and just remind people that there is a CV workshop in which we kind of review some of these elements of having a CV that does indicate like sections, in such a manner that eligibility is clear, and also panelists reviewing it don't have confusion around your roles as a generative artist in the projects you were creating or participating or curating.
Got another question specific to literature, because it says you cannot have more than 3 published books published in the genre in which you're applying. And can you speak to the nature of published works? Does this also include self-published, if you have 3 or more self-published books?
For eligibility, I just want to say this because this can get confusing. So for eligibility, you have to have at least 2 published works that are not self-published. But in terms of the kind of eligibility cap on if you have 3 or more published books, those we're focused on published by other than self-published.
And I think we have an excellent question on which to end, which is, where can we find this recording?
Take it away, Andrea.
So this session is being recorded, and what happens next is we'll do all the closed captioning and such, and then post it to our website. So if you go to the Jerome Foundation website, jeromefdn.org/events, that's where you'll find this recording that's fully captioned. And those were all the questions.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And please don't hesitate if you have further questions to reach out to us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.